sir. Another one on the jig. Bottom of the mouth. Yep. When I'm dragging that jig, I like to keep my rod high. It just keeps the angle of your line up, and so you're able to drag over those rocks. Well, as I say that, I get hung up, but for the most part, I mean, you're obviously going to get stuck, but if you had your rod more horizontal and you're dragging your jig, oh shit. Fish is nice. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's a healthy one. That's probably a 5-pounder. Hell yeah. Probably a 5-pounder. Yo, what's up, y'all? It's Bass Addict back in the garage, and it's about that time that we jump into our top 5 baits for the winter series. If you've been subscribed to my channel for a little bit, I did the top 5 fall baits series. That was my first intro into the top 5 stuff, and got some good feedback. People definitely appreciated the information. A couple people reached out and said that it helped them catch some fish, and so that was awesome. And I thought definitely want to continue that going into the winter time. Out here in Northern California, it's definitely gotten a little colder. Water temps have dropped and the patterns are changing, so I've had to switch up from those fall baits and move into some different stuff to keep getting bites. So yeah, without further ado, just gonna jump into it. Not in any particular order, but bait number 1 for wintertime will be the football jig. And a jig is, I mean, it's like an old classic bait. They've been around forever, for people throwing them for largemouth and smallmouth and spotted bass. But there's tons of different kinds of jigs for different situations. Some are good for like skipping, some are good for flipping around grass and wood, some are good for yeah, pitching around docks and trees and overhanging bushes and all sorts of stuff. And the football jig, it kind of specializes in rock, so generally deeper rock, dragging it on the bottom and working it slow in those colder water situations where those fish might be out a little deeper. So if y'all aren't familiar with wintertime fishing, definitely it gets a little slower. Those fish tend to slow down a little bit, hunker down towards the bottom, and a lot of times they're feeding on crawfish. And so a football jig is a great way to imitate those crawfish. Some of the areas that I like to use them is like deep rock piles, those steep breaks, like if it's like a shallow bank and then there's a steep drop off where there's some chunky rock, I like to throw a football jig. Anywhere where there's rock transitions, say from like smaller pea gravel to more chunky boulders, can be a great area. But just focusing on that hard structure, and whatever depth range you feel like those fish are holding. Some lakes might not be that deep, so that break might be in 10 feet of water. Some places you might have to fish past 20, 30, 40 feet. So just depends, and you can adjust the weight of your jig to the depth of the water you're fishing. Some of the baits that I like specifically, the one I've been throwing recently is the Dobyns football jig. It's a very simple jig, just a lead head. It's got a recessed line tie, so it kind of helps protect your knot when you're dragging it over rocks. Solid weed guard, and you can get them in like packs of 3. And you might be able to get them in even bigger packs, but usually I buy the packs of 3 and they're super affordable. The thing about football jigs is you're dragging them around rock, and so you're gonna get snagged up, you're gonna lose some. So having some affordable jigs that you can throw out there and not really worry about losing them, because you want them to be in those areas where it's gnarly and there's big rocks, and that's where the fish are gonna be. So you can't be worried about losing your baits when you're fishing that kind of stuff. So those Dobyns jigs are great. They're not super expensive, so you can buy a ton, stock up, and they've got some good colors. Another one is the Dirty Jigs football jig. They have a couple different models. They have like a Finesse football jig that has a little bit lighter wire hook if you're fishing around smaller fish or spotted bass or smallmouth bass. That might be a better option. And then they've got the heavier gauge tournament grade football jigs with super thick hook if you're around big largemouth, and some big heavy rock. You want to have a big hook to be able to get those fish out of that stuff. So those are really the 2 brands that I throw for the most part. There's also in situations where I want to go a little more finesse, there's these Keitech, these tiny little tungsten football jigs. Super downsized presentation, but if you need to kind of go more finessey, the fish aren't really wanting the bigger, bulkier jigs, that's a great option. It's a tungsten head, so it's a smaller head compared to the lead, and also you can fill bottom really well. And then another great small football jig is this Bass Patrol. It's another cheap, I think they're like $2 or $3. And they come in some of those smaller sizes, really compact, and you can put a little trailer on there and drag it around for some of those spotted bass or smallmouth, or just more finicky largies. So yeah, whatever brands y'all like, there's a ton of football jigs out on the market. Those are just a couple that I like. But I like those recessed line ties. If you can find that in your football jig, it's kind of inside of the head, so you can protect your knot a little bit better, and not have to worry about breaking off as much. And colors, I base a little bit off of watercolor. So if it's relatively clear water, I like to stick to the natural colors, the browns and oranges, brown and black, brown and red, a little bit of red. If you got some of those brighter red crawfish, that can be good. Brown and purple is also a great color. Dirty Jigs has some good brown and purple colors. And then if your water's a little dirtier, black and red is a great color. Anything with black in it is going to stand out a little better in some stained water. So black and red, black and purple, black and blue are all great options. And then also that kind of bright orange, brown and orange will do well in some of that stained water as well, just standing out a little bit better. But just keeping it simple. If your water's clean, just keep it very natural with those greens and browns, and you should catch a lot of fish. And then my trailers, I like to match up the colors, so staying in those natural green pumpkins and browns with the brown and green pumpkin jigs. And then if I'm going to a black and red or a black and blue, I'll throw on a black and red or black and blue trailer. And then some of the trailers that I like to use this time of year, when the water gets cold, I don't want a ton of action on my trailer. So I don't want something like a Rage Craw where it's gonna have a lot of flap, a lot of movement, because I'm working my jig slow. So I'm not gonna be hopping it up and having those claws flapping on the way down. It's really just gonna be a drag. And so the trailers that I'm using, I want something soft that I can get a little bit of movement on without having to move the bait a lot. But also I just want a good profile so that the fish feel like they're getting a solid meal and not having to use up a bunch of energy to get that meal. So the Gary Yamamoto Flapping Hog is one of the trailers that I've been using a lot. It's got a lot of appendages. Some of them, usually I'll pull off a couple of these just because they'll get in the way on the jig. But that's a good trailer. It doesn't have a bunch of action. It kind of will just stand up and flare out when that jig's sitting on the bottom. Another one from Gary Yamamoto is the double tail grub. It's just basically like a twin curly tail grub. As you're dragging it, it'll just slowly kind of quiver. It's not a bunch of kick and thump, but you get a little bit of action on the drag. So that's a good one. Reaction Innovation Sweet Beaver is a classic jig trailer. Either the 4.2 or the Smalley Beaver, depending on the size of your jig. But you know, just split those tails and you can cut it down a little bit, fit on your jig, and you've got a great jig trailer. Just match up the color and you're good to go. And then the Berkeley Power Bait Chigger Craw is a good one. It's more of a craw style bait, but it doesn't have as aggressive of a flap as, say, the Striking Rage Craw or some of those other baits. But for the most part, I've been throwing the Flapping Hog and the Double Tail Grub are probably my two go-tos as of late. But yeah, it's pretty simple. It's an easy bait to use. Just kind of slowly dragging it on the bottom. You want to feel those rocks. As you feel your jig kind of starting to hang up on those rocks, you can kind of pop it up over. A lot of times those bass will be waiting on the sides of some of those bigger rocks, and so you can kind of shake your rod tip, get that jig to hop over those rocks, and then let it settle back down. And a lot of times that's when you'll get your bite. And for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to go super in depth on my rod, reel, and line setup, but I will link it all in the description so y'all can know what I'm using. And if you're in the market for a new jig rod or whatever, you can go check that out. But I use the Megabass Brailless. It's a 7.4 heavy, but it's got a softer tip, so as you're dragging over those rocks, you get a little bit of give. And also, when those fish come up to jump with that heavy football jig, it kind of helps to keep them pinned a little better. I like a 7-to-1 gear ratio reel, because sometimes they'll eat it. If you're hopping it over a rock, they'll kind of eat it on slack line, and you'll have to pick up some of that line pretty quick. So I like that 7-to-1. And then line, usually either 14 to 16 pound test, fluorocarbon. I like the FC Sniper by Sunline. It's kind of my go-to line. And yeah, generally that 14 to 16 pound range is good. If you're fishing smaller rock, you might be able to go down to 12. And if you're fishing some more chunky stuff, probably stick with that 16. Because you will definitely get your line frayed up. And then lastly, just making sure you're retying after every fish. After you get snagged up, make sure you're checking your line, checking that first like couple feet and feeling for frays, because last thing you want is to get bit by a big fish and swing and break off. So make sure you're retying throughout the day, and just saving yourself that heartbreak. But yeah, the football jig is a great bait this time of year. It catches numbers of fish, it catches big fish, and it's been a confidence bait for me for a long time. I started throwing it way back when I was in high school, so super easy bait for beginners or advanced fishermen. Everyone can catch fish on it. So if you haven't thrown one, definitely check out the description for the links to these baits. Check out some of these trailers and get out there and swing on some fish. But yeah, that's bait number 1 for the top 5 series. I think next up we'll probably jump into deep diving crankbaits, which will be fun. That's kind of going against the slow moving baits and kind of looking to trigger some of those fish even when they're slowed down a little bit. But we'll talk about that on the next video. So appreciate y'all tuning in. Drop a like, comment. If you aren't subscribed, really appreciate y'all subscribing. We already hit 500 subs, which was my goal before the end of the year, so thank y'all for that, and look forward to those videos coming soon. Those next 4, I'll try and pump them out for y'all, so you know what you need to catch fish this time of year. All right, peace.